They set down coffee cups at a crowded gate, flags outside tugging in the dawn breeze while an old man eased into row 22. Somebody scoffed across the aisle, mocking his seat and pressing whispers that he didn't belong, the word fraud, curling like smoke. Then a chain slipped free, dog tags glinting in cabin light, a proof token carried quietly for decades. Suddenly the pilot stiffened, honor itself demanding the course would change. Quiet men leave echoes too. The plane smelled faintly of recycled air and burnt coffee, the kind that lingered no matter how new the filter was. Passengers shuffled down the narrow aisle, dragging carry-ons and sighing at every delay. When the cabin doors closed, the hum of the engines softened into the background, steady as a heartbeat. Walter Reeves lowered himself carefully into row 22, seat B, one hand on the armrest for balance. His frame was wiry but stiff, his movements deliberate, as if each hinge of bone had its own memory. "Hey!" A voice cut across the aisle, sharper than the clink of the buckle. "You sure this is your row, old man?" A ripple of chuckles followed. The speaker was maybe 30, his sweatshirt, crisp earbuds dangling like ornaments. He had that restless edge of someone who'd never been told no. Walter didn't look up right away. He adjusted the lap belt slow, his thumb brushing the edge of a chain beneath his collar. Just a faint glint of silver showed before it disappeared again. He settled back, breathing through the stale air. "You hear me?" the man pressed. "This isn't some veteran's discount seat." A couple of passengers snorted. One woman whispered, "Senile." Another turned her head quickly, pretending to focus on the safety card. It bore the logo of an airline that had merged a decade earlier, the faded blue letters already a little out of place. Walter kept his gaze on the tray table, fingers resting lightly on the folded boarding pass. The hum of the intercom clicked on a reminder to fasten seatbelts. He already had. The man leaned closer across the aisle. "Come on, row 22's for us." "You lost." Walter finally turned his head. His eyes were pale blue, steady as river stones. He didn't answer with words, just a small nod that he was in the right place. That silence unsettled more than a defense might have. A few rows ahead, a child twisted in his seat, clutching a bag of peanuts. He leaned over, arms stretching awkwardly past his mother, and placed the packet in Walter's lap. The old man blinked, then gave the boy a slow nod. A small kindness, quiet but firm, settled the air for a moment. But the younger man wouldn't let it rest. "Guess the flight's got charity seating now," he said, grinning. No one laughed this time. The hum of the cabin filled the space, pressing against every seatback. Walter exhaled through his nose, shoulders easing. He had no need to rise to the bait. Still, the looks lingered. The smirks, the whispers. They pinned him with their assumptions more than any hand could. The boy's peanuts rattled softly in the paper packet. Walter turned it once in his palm, the crinkle of the wrapper, a small reminder that kindness could outlast mockery. He shifted slightly the chain under his collar, glinting for just a breath before it hid again. No one noticed, at least not yet. The flight attendant moved down the aisle with the beverage cart, offering quick smiles, eyes darting toward the small Confrontation, then away. Routine kept her moving. The intercom beeped again. Anyway, the engines roared a little louder as the plane prepared for pushback. Walter leaned against the headrest, his breathing, even his expression, unreadable. Row 22 wasn't supposed to mean anything until it did. The seatbelt sign chimed again, a crisp reminder from the ceiling light. The plane had begun its slow taxi wheels, rattling faintly over seams in the tarmac. The beverage cart clinked in the galley, ready for its first pass. Passengers adjusted earbuds, folded magazines, and settled in for the long haul. Walter Reeves kept his back straight, shoulders squared, though the seat was narrow. As he leaned forward to tighten his belt, the collar of his shirt slipped just enough for the faint glint of a chain to show. A set of dog tags worn smooth at the edges flashed briefly before he tugged the fabric closed. The glint was gone in a blink, but not unseen. A flight attendant paused at row 22, her expression tight with polite resolve. She looked first at Walter, then toward the younger man across the aisle who had raised a brow and smirked. "Sir," she said softly, "this section is pretty full. I think there may be a better seat for you a few rows back. It might be easier for you to get up and down." Walter's voice was low, steady. "This is the seat on my ticket. Row 22B. Her smile thinned. She leaned in, lowering her tone. "Of course, but if you'd be willing, it might avoid any misunderstanding." Walter folded his boarding stub slowly, the creases sharp. His hand didn't tremble. "No need, ma'am. I'll stay where I belong." The air seemed to tighten around them. Conversations dimmed as if a knob had been turned. The beverage cart's rattling wheels provided the only background rhythm. Brad Coyle, 2 rows behind, and already restless, leaned forward into the aisle. His voice carried just enough to be heard. "Fake types never know their place." The words landed heavy like luggage dropping into an overhead bin. A couple of passengers shifted, avoiding Walter's eyes. Ethan Ward, seated across from Walter, caught the flicker of the chain again. He leaned forward, squinting just enough to catch the detail etched into the dull metal. His breath hitched. The year stamped there was wrong off by 1 from what he remembered in history books. For a moment, suspicion sparked. Could the old man be wearing tags that didn't even match his era? The doubt crept in like turbulence, unseen but felt. Ethan sat back, unsettled. He didn't speak, not yet. Walter smoothed the folded stub between his palms, a ritual of calm. He placed it carefully on the tray, as though it were more than paper. A silent beat. The flight attendant lingered, then sighed, retreating with the cart. The hum of the engines deepened as the plane eased toward takeoff. Anyway, tension clung to the row. Eyes flicked back and forth. Some passengers wore skepticism, others discomfort. Walter remained still, his gaze fixed forward, as though time itself had slowed. The boy across the aisle couldn't shake what he'd seen. The glint, the engraving, the steadiness of the man who refused to move. But the boy across the aisle had noticed. The cabin lights dimmed to a softer glow as the plane reached altitude. A faint crackle came from the PA, the captain's voice promising a smooth flight, though the drone of the engines made every word sound far away. People adjusted their seats, but the unease in row 22 only grew. Walter Reeves shifted slightly, the collar of his shirt loosening. This time the chain slipped further out, dog tags hanging halfway into view. The dull metal swayed with each vibration of the plane, catching the overhead light in small flashes. Brad Coyle saw it first. He unbuckled, leaning into the aisle, his expression sharpening. "All right, old man, enough games. Where'd you get those tags?" Walter turned slowly, his pale eyes steady. He said nothing. Coyle pressed harder, voice louder. "I asked you a question. Those aren't yours, are they?" Men died for tags like that. Passengers stirred their whispers, carrying down the row. Stolen valor. Disgraceful. The words piled on, not shouted, but enough to press against Walter like invisible weight. Ethan Ward. The young cadet clenched his fists under the tray table. He could see the metal clearly now, the way the numbers and letters had worn into the surface with time. His training told him details mattered, yet something else stirred inside him, the memory of his father at the post office line, stepping back to let an older man go first, whispering to Ethan, "Respect isn't optional. It's the rent we pay." He cleared his throat. "Maybe we should let him be." Coyle snapped his glare toward Ethan. "What's that kid?" Ethan's voice wavered, but he held steady. I said maybe you should let him be. He's not hurting anyone. The tension thickened. A woman a row ahead muttered, if he can't explain those tags, he's lying. Walter breathed in slowly, then folded his boarding stub again, a careful gesture that made no sound, but carried weight. His silence was not weakness. It was defiance dressed in patience. The overhead lights flickered once the hum of the engines filling the pause. The silence spread like a shadow, drawing every eye to the aisle where Coyle loomed. Still, the younger man pressed forward, his voice sharp. Tell us, old man. What unit? What year? You can't, can you? Walter finally raised his gaze. It was a long time ago. Coyle scoffed, turning to the cabin. See, can't even answer. Fraud. The word hung in the recycled air, sour as spilled coffee. A couple of passengers nodded, convinced by volume more than fact. Ethan leaned forward again, his voice firmer this time. You don't know what he's lived. None of us do. The hum of the engines deepened the rhythm, steady against the rising voices. Anyway, the weight of suspicion pressed on row 22. Walter sat unmoving, the dog tags swaying softly like a pendulum, time itself reminding them all of patience. From the front of the cabin came the sudden crackle of the PA system. A different voice clipped, and professional spoke through the static. Passengers turned. Footsteps echoed down the aisle, heavy and deliberate. Then the captain was called. The hum of the engines leveled out, steady as a drumbeat under every breath. The cabin had grown taut, like a wire stretched too far. Row 22 sat at its center, an unwilling stage. Passengers craned their necks, waiting for something to break. The captain's footsteps came first, measured heavy, echoing along the narrow aisle. The flight attendant led him, her jaw tight, eyes flicking nervously from Walter to Coyle. The passengers straightened in their seats, conversations falling away, until only the faint hiss of ventilation remained. Coyle leaned back just enough to make room, but his voice carried sharp. Captain, this man, he's wearing tags. He can't explain. I think he's lying. The captain's eyes narrowed. He turned to Walter, taking in the frail shoulders, the pale blue eyes, the half-exposed chain glinting against his collar. Slowly, Walter shifted, and the tags slid free at last, dangling in full view. The cabin gasped. Metal swung gently, catching the overhead light in small gleams. The engravings were shallow, softened by time. The captain froze, stiffening as recognition washed over his face. He reached out, not to touch, but to steady himself. His breath caught. Where did you serve? Sir Walter's voice was low-weathered. It doesn't matter anymore. It was a long time ago. The captain shook his head. His posture straightened as though instinct demanded it. His hand brushed his cap brim, not out of formality, but respect. The cabin hushed, the silence almost holy. Still, Coyle pushed his words jagged. You see, he won't even give a straight answer. That proves it. The captain turned on him, his voice firm but quiet, sharper than a shout. It proves nothing except that you've forgotten what respect looks like. The words hung in the recycled air. Even the hum of the engines seemed to dim. Walter let the tags rest in his palm. They were more than metal. They were names, unspoken nights, unending, and promises carved deep. The pilot's eyes glistened as he squared his shoulders. We'll change course. The phrase was simple, but the meaning rippled through the cabin. It was not about airspeed or direction. It was a pivot of honor, a correction of dignity. The course of perception itself had shifted. Passengers felt the weight of it. The whispers stopped. Coyle's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His authority shrank until even his silence seemed smaller than the hum of the engines. Then the air stilled. The tags gleamed once more as the captain gave a small, deliberate nod. A silent salute. The cabin held its breath, each soul witnessing a quiet transfer of reverence. Ethan felt his pulse thrum. For the first time, he understood what his father had meant at the post office. Respect is the rent we pay. The boy knew, without words, that he was looking at something larger than a single man. He was looking at legacy. Anyway, the silence deepened until even the faint chime of the seatbelt sign sounded like a bell in a cathedral, pinned not by hands, but by the weight of protocol. The wheels touched down with a muted thud, a shiver running through the cabin as the engines reversed with a roar. People applauded half-heartedly, more out of reflex than joy. Yet in row 22, no one moved quickly. The moment still lingered, suspended like contrails in the dusk sky. The intercom crackled as the plane taxied to the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special acknowledgement today. One of our passengers, Mr. Walter Reeves, carries with him the service tags of an honored era. Please join us in a quiet thank you." The words spread through the cabin like warm light. All eyes turned toward Walter. He bowed his head slightly, the chain glinting, as if echoing the announcement itself. The recognition wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was the kind of justice that didn't require a gavel-only memory. Coyle shifted in his seat, face pale. He avoided every gaze his bravado drained. He tugged at his sleeve, suddenly smaller than the man he'd mocked. Passengers who had whispered fraud earlier now stared at him with a silent reproach. The line to exit formed, as always, slow and impatient. Walter stood last, letting others pass. Ethan hesitated, waiting too, as though tethered by an unseen cord. At the gate, a group of veterans in plain clothes stood scattered among the waiting crowd. One by one they noticed. The dog tags, the bearing the quiet nod. Without words, they came to attention, lifting their hands in a salute sharp enough to cut the air. The terminal fell hushed. Travelers slowed, phones lowered the busy rhythm of arrivals, arrested by something older and deeper. Walter didn't return the salute with pomp. He simply placed a hand over the chain at his chest and gave a small nod. That was enough. The veterans lowered their hands, some with mist in their eyes. Still, the boy watched. Ethan's chest swelled with a pride he didn't fully understand, but he knew he would not forget. Walter paused near the memorial board by the terminal wall, rows of names etched in brass. He rested a hand lightly against the glass, tracing one name with his fingertips silent. The hum of the airport faded. Only the faint echo of a choir song drifting from a nearby chapel filled the space. Anyway, the world around him stirred again. A diner stand near the gate buzzed with customers refilling coffee cups. The barista, without prompting, set a steaming cup on the counter in front of Walter. "On the house, sir," she said softly. Walter allowed a rare smile. "Guess even the airport coffee has its charm, neighbor." The small ripple of laughter eased the tension, letting the community exhale together. Coyle lingered at a distance, unable to meet Walter's gaze. He stood awkwardly, hands in pockets, his silence louder than his earlier accusations. Justice had no need for punishment. It had already arrived in the form of humility. Ethan stepped forward, staying close as Walter moved toward the exit. He could have walked away, could have let the moment drift into the crowd's memory. But something held him. Still, the boy followed. Evening had settled soft over the small town, painting the sky in strokes of rose and amber. Walter Reeves sat on the old porch swing, the wood creaking with every slow sway. The cicadas had begun their chorus, steady as a drumline hidden in the trees. The air was warm, familiar, touched with the smell of cut grass. Beside him sat Ethan Ward, the boy who had followed without being told. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, unsure how to begin. The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy. It was patient, like Walter himself. Walter turned the chain in his hands. The dog tags caught the fading light, edges dulled from decades of memory. He studied them for a long moment, thumb running across the shallow engraving. "These," he said slowly, "aren't medals. They're markers, reminders of those who never got to sit on swings like this." Ethan swallowed. I thought they proved you were part of something." Walter's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile. "They proved nothing, son. Except that I lived long enough to carry them. The proof is in how you treat the ones around you." The swing creaked, rocking gently. Cicadas rose louder, then softened again. Anyway, Ethan sat straighter, his eyes fixed on the tags. "Then why keep them?" Walter held them out, the chain dangling between his fingers. The metal gleamed once, then steadied. "Because someone told me not to let them be forgotten. And I've carried that promise longer than I ever thought I would." He placed the tags in Ethan's open hand. The boy froze, the weight surprising in its lightness. "Mr. Reeves, Walter," the old man interrupted gently. "Just Walter." The boy looked down at the tags, then back at the man beside him. "I'll never forget row 22. The words lingered in the air, not just a memory of a seat number, but a vow. The swing rocked once more, the crickets keeping rhythm. Walter closed his eyes briefly, listening. A long, quiet breath slipped out, as if he'd set down a burden. Across town, Brad Coyle sat alone, no crowd to witness, no voices to justify him. His silence had become its own verdict. Justice didn't always arrive in courtrooms. It sometimes arrived in the absence of defiance. Back on the porch, Ethan clutched the tags tighter. His voice dropped almost a whisper. "The quiet ones carry us home." Walter opened his eyes, a softness glinting in the pale blue. He nodded once, slow and sure. The porch creaked again, the swing rocking under the weight of 2 generations bound by one promise. The course had already changed. The cicadas droned on the stars, blinking awake, a reminder that life moves forward, but never forgets. And to anyone who might hear their story later, the message was simple. If this story moved you, share it forward. The porch swing rocked gently, cicadas humming in the dark, as Walter placed the worn dog tags into Ethan's hands. The metal was cool, almost ordinary, yet it gleamed like a lamp in a winter window, carrying the weight of lives remembered. Still, Ethan whispered he would never forget row 22, and the quiet promise filled the night air like a hymn. Walter gazed toward the memorial board by the gate, in his mind hearing again the murmur of travelers who had stood in silence. Their coffee cups paused mid-air, their respect louder than words. Anyway, the course of one life had shifted. The boy knew that justice sometimes arrived without a verdict, only in humility. The quiet ones carry us home. The course had already changed.